Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into this special Locked On Louisville podcast episode featuring Locked On Podcast Network national recruiting analyst Brian Smith. Brian, what's going on, man?
Just ready for the onslaught of recruiting that basically has just started in the last week and won't end until sometime in mid-July.
It has indeed started. If you can't tell by now, we're going to talk a lot football recruiting as it relates to Flyville 25 for Louisville. Before we do that, I want to tell you about our title sponsor of the show, LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. So I brought Brian on to talk about some of the players that have recently scheduled official visits for the Cardinals. Some names that most fans, if you follow football recruiting, are probably vaguely familiar with. Some are going to be new names. Spring game comes up here in just over a week. It's going to be a jam-packed visitor list for the Cardinals with some very interesting names on it. Brian, I'll be honest, man, we haven't really talked football since your last appearance on the show, which was back in February. Since then, the basketball program fired Kenny Payne, hired Pat Kelsey, and it's been all basketball talk since then. But football's going to start to pop its head up again. So I wanted to get into the football side of things. What better way to do that than bringing you on the show? One name that has been talked about a lot in Louisville circles is Ben Hanks, a player from the area that you're – I don't even know why I can't even speak English at the moment. A player from your old stomping grounds down in Florida, guy down in Miami that we've talked about. Louisville's at least taking a shot at Hanks. And I think we mentioned after his unofficial visit, well, let's see if he takes a little bit of a step further and schedules that official. Well, he has a couple in line, but Louisville will get the first crack at Hanks. I know he has ties to the Florida area, seems to be a frequent visitor at Miami. Overall thoughts on where this recruitment is going?
If I remember correctly, that's either Ben Hanks' son or his nephew. I think it's his son. He played for the Gators back in the day. He plays at Booker T. Washington under Ice Harris. It's one of the best programs in the South. He's one of the best prep coaches in the country. Kid that's extremely long. I would have taken him as a sophomore. I've seen him play several times live, camps, Under Armour, whatever it may be. And this is a guy that can be your corner one. You could play zone or man. He's like most South Florida kids. He prefers to man up and talk bad about you and the rest of your family before, during, and after the play. He's one of those guys that's going to get after you. He'll have offers and all the way to signing day from elite programs. Florida State, Miami are always going to be in line with the Miami kids in general, but his family ties all three of the Florida schools. That's hard to beat. But Louisville seems to be kind of the one program that gets kids out of Miami randomly now. So you got to put an asterisk by him. I don't know. I haven't spoken to him in quite a while, but I wouldn't be surprised if he lined up that visit first. He has an interest. Why would you not just visit the Florida schools and be done? And I'm sure he could visit Georgia or A&M or whatever too. But something tells me Louisville's a little more of a player than some others because they've gotten other kids out of there that the schools in Florida wanted in the last 2-3 years.
Right. And the other official visits you alluded to, there's a lot of in-state flavor here. Florida, Georgia, FSU, and Miami in that order. Try not to read too much in between the tea leaves, but this is a guy I know that you, for those that don't know, Brian has had a lot of history covering the Miami Hurricanes program as well as the state of Florida in general. But I mean, he's probably, I would venture into saying, geographically speaking, he's probably been to Miami's campus way more often than not as it relates to other programs. Miami gets that last official visit. I hate to put the timeline against Louisville here, but it feels like if they legitimately have a chance in this recruitment, do you feel like a commitment has to happen sooner rather than later? It feels like the longer this goes out in terms of this recruitment, the more of an uphill battle Louisville faces.
They need to either win the recruitment to the point he doesn't take any more visits, which is almost impossible in today's age. He lives 20 minutes from Miami's campus.
Right.
So depending on traffic. That could be an hour and 20 minutes, depending on the time of day. But he's also a kid that is from South Florida. South Florida kids take visits. So it's really random with these guys. Some of my buddies that live down there, somebody John Garcia Jr., Andrew Ivins, Larry Bluestein, all the people I know in the business, when we show up at the same game, same event, we always bemoan the fact how it is impossible, even with the kids that we know down there, to project where they're going because they have so many people around them that they may or may not need to have around them trying to get in their ear. So it's hard. I think that Louisville has a chance with that first visit, but the best chance they have is probably to knock him out, and he at least cancels part of his other visits. If he takes all the Florida visits and the Georgia visit, I doubt he goes to Louisville. That's just my history and just understanding that area. But Miami is the most volatile city in the country to project.
I remember you saying that, and I think that that's almost been a talking point. In one quote that I like to use is that it's its own little different continent.
Oh yeah, it's not even. I don't even consider Miami a part of Florida, not even remotely. No, it's way different than any other part of the state.
And this is going to be a very interesting recruitment to look at. I thought it was very interesting that he scheduled that official visit to at least show that the interest there is somewhat genuine. How far that's going to take Louisville, well, TBD. It seems like definitely an uphill battle. Another name, let's put the Sunshine State to the side for the moment. Let's go to your current state over in Alabama. CJ May, another name that we've talked about, actually was on campus just a couple weeks ago for an unofficial visit, scheduled his official visit for the last weekend of May, a player that you've talked about in length on this show. At this point in time, it looks as if Louisville is the only official visit at the moment for May, with seemingly the Alabama schools holding off at the moment, whether or not they're going to get involved or not. Louisville being the top visit, how significant is that? Or the only visit, I should say. How significant is it?
I don't know what the hell Alabama is doing. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but they dropped the ball on some kids that are even better than CJ in state. And I mean, dropped the ball. So they're weird. I don't think their staff has done a very good job to date, and I'm being kind. Auburn is being very selective. They've had CJ on campus multiple times, and they're organized. They're rolling. But I don't know if he's a tier 1 guy for them. He's probably more tier 2. And they're trying to get Zion Grady and Jared Smith. Those, if you live down here, I don't have to mention schools or anything else. Those are the 2 edge rushers. And there's a couple other guys too in that realm. Like this state always has D linemen. This year, it's utterly ridiculous. Right. There are 7 or 8 kids in this state this year that in some capacity could play at Georgia on the D line. So CJ's just, I mean, he's a really good athlete and he's an edge guy, but he might be an outside linebacker, I don't think he's the perfect fit for any one thing, but Louisville's downhill aggressive scheme, they're going to find a place for him. And they're probably the ones, if I was to guess, it's going to come after him the hardest. And the visit kind of speaks to that.
Is he more of a Leo, Brian, more of like an outside linebacker hybrid?
That's what I mean. That's like, I don't think that's defined yet. That's like when he was originally committed to Notre Dame, they kind of thought that, but like there was still a projection there.
Right.
I don't know. Like it's amazing to me, like how big kids get. To go back in time a ways, a kid from Alabama that I knew that you probably heard of, Justin Tuck, he went to Notre Dame, was like 215 out of high school, small town, Kellyton, Alabama. He ended up playing for the Giants like over 270 at one point.
Right.
How dedicated are you? How much weight can you put on? I'm not Justin is uber motivated, obviously. But this is a kid that if he does it right, he could be 250 and the perfect outside linebacker like you're talking that just comes after the quarterback play after play. But he's good enough athlete that you can play him in space too. So he might be a good mix for that 3-3-5 and 4-3 or 4-2-5 look and do different things with him and keep defenses at a little bit of an advantage, at least occasionally. Obviously, offenses have most of the advantage right now, but he has the length you're looking for. And Louisville is like always recruited Alabama. They always get a couple kids out of there. Mason Mims obviously being another.
If you ask 24/7 Sports, it seems like at this point in time in May's recruitment, the top competition for him isn't in the state. It's more so over a little bit to the west, where Ole Miss picked up a crystal ball for him, 7 out of 10, which I guess is
pretty high.
Decently high. from David Johnson, who is from inside the Rebels. I thought that was pretty interesting. This comes at the end of March. So it seems like timeline-wise, pretty significant there.
Yeah, I think that Ole Miss, like Louisville, they have a big collective and all that. That's attractive to kids. And Lane has an incredible ability to annoy people that he enjoys. Him and Auburn have a love-hate relationship. That's part of that. And like he was in contention for the job, although he takes jabs at it, and he likes recruiting the state. So any kid from Alabama that takes a visit to Ole Miss, you should take it a little more serious. He spent time in the state. If people don't remember, he was the OC for Nick in Tuscaloosa for a while. I imagine that they will be a factor as well. And they have deep pockets there. So keep that in mind.
Both Ben Hanks and CJ May will be on Louisville's campus, or projected to be on Louisville's campus. Things change like the wind with recruiting. But seemingly May 31st, that weekend is becoming sort of the next big recruiting weekend minus the spring game. But there will be some other players on campus before that, a couple of Miami players from Miami Central High School that we'll talk with Brian about here momentarily. Before we do that, I want to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Look, playoff time in the NBA is coming up as well as the NHL. Baseball is getting into the full swing of things, no pun intended. FanDuel continues to be your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Continuing on along in this Locked On Louisville recruiting episode brought to you by LinkedIn with Locked On Podcast Network national recruiting analyst Brian Smith. Brian, two more players. One we have talked about on the show. The other one is a new name to the listeners. Both play for Miami Central. It's my understanding that I think somebody actually transferred in. There's been so many names from South Florida with Louisville. I mean, it's all over the place, Brian. But the first one, forgive me if I'm butchering this last name. Is it Floyd Boucard? Is that how you say his last name?
He's from Canada, I believe Toronto or something. It might be Boucard. I'm not sure, but he's a great kid. I've met him. I just call him Floyd. I keep it simple. Well, he's a horse too, man. He's a horse.
I knew that somebody was not from the area. Floyd, sort of in that group that is a little bit overlooked. He's just outside of the top 80, depending on the composite ratings that you look at. But with the strong junior season, looks like he's going to continue to surge up the rankings. Yeah. I find it very interesting, Brian, that Louisville's included in his official visits list, but also you have Miami, which expected, but also Michigan State and Oklahoma. Seems like a very interesting group of schools in that official visit list.
Well, Michigan State is, again, he's from Canada originally.
Well,
so you can't consider him a Miami kid. That's the first thing. Second off, they have a lot of playing time, and they also have deep NIL pockets. So there you go.
That would definitely that would make sense. He will be on campus June 1st. So actually, technically, that May 31st window as well. I thought it was pretty interesting, though. He actually spent some time at Mobile Christian at Alabama this past season. Played both ways, helped them win. I think it was 3A in which he was playing in. Sort of tell me a little bit about the competition he was going up against and sort of how he projects now going up against some of the best talent in the country in Miami. Do you think he's going to continue to surge up rankings, or do you think that was a matter of inflated stats in a bad part of Alabama?
Well, he was dominant at Under Armour Miami, so all questions are already answered. If you're going against top players in the state of Florida, it was a poor group of O-line in Florida again this year. It's usually not the best of spots, but he was a dominant player, tests well, is really well-spoken. He's a kid that relates to people, and Florida State and Miami won him. All those things lead me to believe that it's a big thumbs up if Louisville gets it. Great kid to be around, but I can't teach the barrel chest and the first step quickness. He's 3 tech. that can play in a one-gap scheme and create havoc and draw double teams. He's exactly what you're looking for.
6'3", 315 pounds, an absolute mammoth of a human being. Miami offered, I think it was just a couple weeks ago officially. He scheduled that official visit. How involved is this a situation where if they miss out on their top guys, then they look Floyd's way, or do you think that he's going to be a priority moving forward? What's sort of your take on how involved Miami's going to look to get?
They're involved. Right after the Under Armour, he got a bunch of offers where like all the the usual suspects were at the event.
Right.
Chad Simmons, John Garcia, Andrew Ivins, etc. We all thought he was fantastic, and he earned it. And those phone calls take place during the event. Trust me on this. I'm sure Louisville had somebody there too that was talking to somebody that I was standing next to at some point. That's just how this business works. So he got several offers right after, whether verbal or official, it doesn't really matter. And there's a really simple rule. If it's in question and it's a defensive tackle that's 280, 300, whatever, the answer is yes. There aren't enough of them. So Miami and Florida State, I know, really like him. That's not a good sign for out-of-state schools. But, I mean, if you're going to win, you got to beat them for top recruits too, especially D tackle. As a history, and since the early 80s, Miami has more guys drafted in the NFL at D-line than any other. They also have 5 national titles. They go hand in hand. Louisville needs to get some more of those kids. This is the kind of recruitment you got to win somehow.
Yeah.
And if you're going to consistently compete with Miami and Florida State in recruiting, I think they got the right head coach, and I know he can coach offense, but defense is about recruiting. Right. This is the kind of kid you have to get. And I don't know if he's like number 1 on their board, but he's somewhere in the top 5 or 6 guys, I'd imagine, for the Canes. Randy Adarica, the defensive tackle that plays next to him at Miami Central, both Florida State and Miami would take 2. Right. This kid can go wherever, but I mean, Miami Central has 20 kids that I know of just in the senior class this upcoming year that will play college football. So
it kind of gives me like Leonard Taylor vibes. Am I too far off on that?
Taylor was a lot more advanced because he'd been coached by NFL players coming up out of Palmetto High School. He ended up getting to the
standpoint. It
seems yeah. Like he's bigger. Leonard was 255, 260. He got too big at Miami. He didn't achieve anywhere what he should have, in my opinion. But out of high school, he was an animal. He was a top 10 kid. This kid's a little more traditional power player, and he's also a young man that has the ability to just, again, draw double teams. Sometimes the most important stat is they had to use 2 guys against you. Right. Nobody wants to hear that because it's really boring, but your linebacker just made 10 tackles in the game. So he didn't get blocked. Football is a team sport. It is the ultimate team sport, and that's why Miami and Florida State immediately like, oh, look at this kid. They get that video. On Thursdays after an Under Armour camp, it goes out to every single school in the Power 5. Every single one buys it.
No, I believe it. I want to tell you a little bit of a funny story, getting a little bit off track. There's a holiday basketball tournament for high schools in the area called the King of the Bluegrass. It's probably the most highly renowned in the state. Miami Palmetto came up to Louisville to play, and I was announcing games like I do, and I was thinking, man, this Leonard Taylor guy's good. And I'm like, why does that name sound familiar? And the scorekeeper right next to me is like, that guy's a top 10 recruit in football. And I looked up and I was like, I'll be damned. Yes, he is. So I thought that was I knew right then. I was like, man, this guy, he's quick with the ball. I mean, but regardless, don't want to get too far off track. Brian, the other Miami Central guy, a player that I personally was looking to see if he was going to schedule an official visit. He was on campus this past fall for a game. That's Ezekiel Marcelin, linebacker from Miami Central. It looks like at this point, the Cardinals are his only official visit, but seems to obviously par for the course, be on Miami's campus a lot, and seems to have a ton of interest in Florida State as well. But Louisville seemingly getting the first crack at Marcelin.
I think he's got one with UM as well. But
does he?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. But with the Miami Central kids, it's irrelevant because they're literally
right down
30 minutes. I mean, they can schedule it in 10 minutes later, go.
Yeah.
So the only visits that matter are the ones that are outside. Like it's to get to Tallahassee from Miami to drive is something like 8 hours. I mean, the state is humongous. So it's interesting. Like he'll have to fly to Florida State at some point. I'm sure they'll try to take him some other schools, but Louisville is one of the schools that's been on him for a long time. He is yoked. When you shake that man's hand, I know he's not old enough to drive yet, but you would beg to differ. So he's the inside linebacker that the state of Florida is famous for. Is not the tallest dude, but he can run like a deer and he can hit like a truck. So that's, in today's game, if you can't run in space, you will be exposed. Marcelin is the kind of guy that can play on third downs and on first downs when it's 12 personnel he's going against.
That's pretty interesting because now, granted, I agree that he's an inside linebacker at the next level, but I've seen some people say, is there it seems like an outside linebacker spot's not in his future, more so inside. Don't you agree?
Will. He could be a Will. Old school Miami, they might put him at Mike and just play him 5 yards off the ball and try to have him run around the guards.
Right.
That's what Florida State, Miami. I know they hate each other, but those two schools were identical in how they played defense pretty much in the 80s and 90s. And he would have been that kind of guy. I had imagined Louisville was going to try to do something similar. Obviously, they blitz a gazillion times a game. He would be a good fit for that. I'm curious to see how his visit goes. And I don't know, at one point I was told, I don't know if Miami's going to take him, if he would come, blah, blah, blah. And then I heard about he's going to take the OV. I'm not sure where that stands. And the school that's the most difficult to project inside the state of Florida is Florida State. They beat to their own drum. They got a kid that played last year as a freshman as a corner. His only Power 5 offer was Florida State. And he was from some podunk town in Mississippi. Nobody else wanted him, and they found a 6'1" corner. So they do their own thing, and they're recruiting him. Yeah, I'm not going to argue with Norvell. He's an incredible evaluator. He's really good. So I'd imagine that's the other school. They always prioritize the greater Broward and Dade County areas.
Interesting. Obviously, I remember you telling me before the show, as it relates to Louisville, your knowledge might not necessarily be as, privy to what, you know about South Florida, but I would argue that it is extremely informational for Louisville fans because we want to know how local programs feel about their own guys. You know what I'm saying?
That I can do.
Schools in Florida, does Louisville have a legitimate chance? And you can sort of piece together, well, how do the local schools feel about them? Are they going to prioritize insert candidate here or are they not? So I think it's very informational. There's been a name out there that, look, if there is an uphill battle, it's this one. But I'm excited that they're getting this player onto campus for the spring game. We're going to mention who that is here momentarily. Do want to tell you that the title sponsor of this Locked On recruiting episode of the show is LinkedIn Jobs. Be sure to go over to linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege to post your job for free. I won't keep you waiting too long. Brian Smith, national recruiting analyst for the Locked On Podcast Network, joining us for this fine Tuesday evening edition of the show. Brian, Jabari Brady will be on the Louisville's campus for the spring game. If there is an uphill battle, this is as uphill as it gets for the Louisville Cardinals. Now, he will be joined by his highly talented teammate, Denarius Gray, who is committed to Auburn at this point in time, but both of them will be on campus, along with a handful of other big-name guys. That list is fluid at the moment. Spring game set for April 19th, but Brian, I'm trying to find some sort of positives here, and just getting these players on campus has to feel like, even though you can't look too much into it, this wasn't happening 5 years ago. And I think it's a testament to what Louisville's doing on the field and the NIL infrastructure in place.
I think the first thing is the coaching staff has passing game history. The Brown family, et cetera, and Louisville is going to put the ball in the air. That makes it a little easier to sell. Number two, they've just, for whatever reason, they found their way into Florida, South Florida in particular. For those of you who don't know, the two players that Dalton's talking about are both class of 2026. Denarius and Jabari have transferred into none other than Chaminade Madonna, where Jeremiah Smith happened to go. Losing Jeremiah Smith to Ohio State and JoJo Trader to Miami, they still have 4 or 5 kids that are Power 5 at receiver. It's insane. So South Florida's rich get richer. Jabari is as elite as it gets physically. Like when he walks out, if you don't look at his face, he still looks young. You would say, okay, he's 21 years old. He's 6'2", 200 pounds, a little over, can run really well, has extremely long arms. He's starting to get some technique. He works with some good people. And he's a guy that has a chance to be a top 20 pick in the draft when it's all said and done. Daenerys is a kid that needs to add a little more weight, but it's a very similar deal, and he can break down and move very well, and he can go get it. Like both these guys at the Under Armour camp were not very well guarded. They did their thing. One went to the Miami, one Jabari went to one in Orlando, but they both were really good against top-notch DBs. One-on-ones, there's nowhere to hide. They also took the ball off the head of guys during last season in South Florida. These are elite players that can pretty much go where they want, but Jabari is probably a 5-star.
Yeah, I guess I should have mentioned that at this point in time, Jabari Brady is. I actually just had this up, and let's see, he's ranked by 24/7 Sports to be the 11th best player in the class. Like he's probably 5-star.
That's pretty much where I would have him, somewhere between 5 and 15.
Can I ask you this though, Brian? We know that the NIL infrastructure is in place for Louisville. They've shown it, especially in the transfer portal. As it relates to these elite high school recruits, from your experience, how much would Louisville even be able to get a guy like Brady with the NIL infrastructure in place? And where I'm getting with that is that how high of a priority and how much is enough to get a player as elite as Brady? Like, can Louisville go out and get a player of that ranking? We saw TJ Capers fell down the rankings a little bit, but is this one of those like once in a blue moon type additions that Louisville could try to make here with the NIL in place? Or are we sort of still opening up Pandora's box, if that makes sense, in terms of NIL?
Well, there's not enough precedent to say, but the more important point is every kid's a little different. Jabari's a really easygoing, nice guy. Daenerys got a little more edge to him, but again, well-spoken, easygoing. They're both pretty smart kids.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to look at their opportunities. Miami's NIL is insane.
Yeah.
Their main NIL guy is the one that owns, whatever word you want to use, the MLS soccer team in South Florida. So Louisville's pockets are deep, but there ain't nobody deeper than that. So if Miami wants a kid, it's almost impossible to keep them away. The kid just has to want to leave.
Right.
So Jeremiah Smith got offered money that you can't even imagine to turn down Miami. Like insane. I'm going to leave it at that. He just wanted to go to Ohio State, so he did. But
makes sense.
Jabari, he's a kid that's a little bit different. Like Jeremiah's wired different than about any kid I've ever met. He's probably the most devoted into his craft as anybody I've seen. Jabari's a kid that's like on that next tier. Like, I don't know if I'll see another Jeremiah Smith in the next 10 years, but at the same time, he's kind of open-minded. He's going to take in all data. It wouldn't shock me if Louisville was in his final group because he's going to look at, kind of like Jeremiah told me, he said, I picked Ohio State because of development.
Mm-hmm.
So he picked them.
There. I mean, obviously.
I can't blame him. Yeah. I get it. But at the same time, you also have to look at the other side of it. For whatever reason, a lot of South Florida kids just want to get out of Dodge. If Jabari's one of those kids, maybe that works out. And obviously him and Daenerys are taking the visit. It's a good sign. Louisville has zero shot at these kids unless they get multiple unofficial visits. They need to get both of them back on campus this fall for another game. They don't play Notre Dame at home this year, but somebody. I don't know if it's Kentucky. They got to get them for somebody.
Right.
And then they got to get an official visit next year to land them. But it will take a lot of NIL to get a kid like that.
Yeah.
But he's going to get offered Jabari will have 50 offers.
Oh, so, of course. Oh, hell, he's already got over 36 or something like that from what I counted. I mean, he's going to be
what we know of.
one of the more elite wide receivers in the country. Brian, last question I'll ask. As it pertains to spring games and stuff like that, I know spring games are kind of, I won't say half-assed, but they're not full speed. You don't get really the full atmosphere of it. In my opinion, I've seen banter about, what the spring game stands for. To me, it just feels like a more unique unofficial visit. But I've had the argument with some Louisville fans that are like, no, it's just like an official. And I'm like, no, I don't think so.
No. An official visit is 48 hours where they parade them around and they can spend a ton of money on them.
Right.
Unofficials, it's a lot less they can do. They don't get the lodging and all that, although a lot of schools probably pay for it anyway. Most do. Or I'm not going to dodge that. But at the same time, you know what? It's about relationships. I've said it on your show 50 times. This is another chance to build a relationship with everybody, Brahman, everybody else on staff, the players on the team, other recruits. They're going to want to know who the hell Mason Mims is, all these things. It's easier to do face-to-face.
Right.
So you look at it from the opposite. How much of a chance does Louisville have to get Jabari Brady or Daenerys Gray with just an official visit? Zero.
First of all, you're probably not getting an official visit.
Exactly. So that's why this is more important. And it's a little more fun. There'll be some people there. They get to see some of the girls on campus. They get to see like the city itself and stuff. It's good. But there's only one official visit. You need that to be the last because that's when they meet the academic advisors and they get all the tour and everything's a little different. That's more important.
Right. That makes sense. I lied. This is actually the last question. I wasn't planning on discussing him, but since you mentioned his name, I heard from a couple people that were down there that Mason Mims looked really good at his most recent competition in the the Elite 11 regionals down there in I don't even know where it was exactly,
Oxford.
But it sounds like he performed pretty well.
I was there, but I wasn't really focusing on anybody but a couple of kids. Yeah. I'll have to go back and look at footage. I heard the same, but again, like I was there to photograph and video 3 kids. So he's a really good quarterback, and I was sold on him a long time ago. The thing that's knocked on him is he's not like a true dual threat, and he's not like just gigantic or anything. He's just super efficient. He fits Brahm's offense. So he's a guy that'll redshirt in 2 or 3 years, be the starter, even though he doesn't have the bright lights name. He'll start at Louisville. He's a good fit.
You heard it from Brian Smith, and if he doesn't, everyone make sure to spam him on Twitter. You can find his Twitter listed below if you're listening on YouTube. For those listening, it's at FBScout_Florida, but definitely don't do that. People will actually take that literally, Brian. But Brian, appreciate you joining the show, shedding a little bit of light in terms of South Florida recruiting, which is as important as ever as it has been in Louisville, seemingly. So a lot of eyes will be on that area over the next couple months. We'll definitely have you on the show here soon. But that's going to wrap up this Tuesday episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here.